Okay, good morning. We have Richard, so it's official. We can start. Dave is gone today, so stuck with me. A couple of quick announcements. They need this room after we're done here today, so they're going to be opening up that wall and starting to set up. So means we have just a few minutes to linger and have a last cup of coffee and remaining donuts before you get out of here. So, all right. I guess that was only one announcement. I'm going to open this up with prayer and turn it over to Richard, who's on the big screen behind me, and we'll get started. Father God, we are grateful for who you are. You're good, wise, you're sovereign, and that you care about our lives to the ends and breed, that you are trustworthy and good, faithful to the end. Thank you for your loving kindness and your staying power in the lives in a world that is just so unraveled. Pray for those around us that don't know you, that they would come to know you, that your gospel would come and that redeem the poor, that you have us in your name. Pray for that. Thank you for Richard. Thank you for his life, his ministry, his teaching, and his wisdom. Thank you for him taking the time to be with us this morning to share for his generosity and for your blessing on our time together. Go out of here different people than we came in. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. It's all yours, Richard.
Well, it's good to be with all of you once again. And I would just ask a favor if you would be praying for my sister Carrie. Some of you might have been following that she's had some when she was 16. If you ever took experience in God, my dad tells the story for having cancer, and they did a bunch of chemo and radiation. She had a very severe case, and they weren't sure they could save her, but they did. But I think especially the radiation really did a number on her, some of her body, and really it caused her parts of her heart to become quite calcified, and so her heart's been failing on her, and she's been in the hospital in intensive cardiac ward for 5 or 6 weeks now in Atlanta. And last week her heart just totally stopped working, and fortunately they had her on some machines, and otherwise she would have certainly died. But so they've been doing what they can to try to get her heart functioning somehow, and but along the way she's her right leg basically atrophied, and we thought last Sunday they were going to amputate her leg. She's been unconscious for days, doesn't even know about her leg situation. She went under thinking they're going to insert some stuff in her heart, and she's been asleep ever since. And so this morning, and probably the next 30 minutes or so, surgeon's going to come in and check her leg and decide whether he needs to amputate it, probably just above the knee or not. So would you just pray? She's got a muscle that's not working, and they're just kind of afraid of leaving stuff in her leg where it's not working, and it could cause infection in her body and so on. And so her poor husband has got his task with having to decide what to do, and then knowing that his wife will eventually wake up and he'll have to tell her she doesn't have a leg anymore. So so pray. The other day God spared her leg, but some of it's improving, but the muscle, one of the key muscles, is not. And so we're just praying that he'll see something positive today that lets him at least wait a bit longer. And just pray for my brother-in-law Wendell. So tough, there's always something tough going on in someone's life, and you just have to pray and just trust the Lord to show grace in it. So today I thought I would just I'll walk you through a very, very interesting passage that it's in some ways very controversial, and in other ways it's rich with application for us. And I remember years ago when I was a pastor, I loved, especially I loved the weekends, because all my congregation came, and I got to see them all, and they got to hear me preach. I got to encourage them, and I could get feedback and I could shake their hands and love on them. And then they'd go away and I wouldn't see them for some of them for another week. And so Mondays were always a little depressing for me because I got to wait a whole week till I get all my folks here again. And at a certain point, God just really convicted me that I needed to, that my working people they didn't stop existing all week until Sunday. They went off to their jobs on Monday morning. And so I began to just take it upon myself to go visit a lot of my church members and to see their workplace and walk the shop floor with them and see their office, meet some of their colleagues, and just not to be intrusive, but just so I would know how to pray for them. And when I was working on sermons, I'd know kind of what they were facing. And I remember one particular guy named Mark. He was the number two guy at an upcoming new company. It was growing rapidly, and so I'd arranged to go see him. And I came into his office. It's a huge office. His office was right next to the owner's office, and when I got there, Mark began to show me just some of the stress he was under, some of the pressure, and his boss was very keen to keep growing his company and basically would pull out all the stops to get a contract. And so Mark took me into the boss's office, and it's got a fully stocked bar, and the boss would pour alcohol freely with potential clients and expected Mark, his number two man, to imbibe fully. And there were just a number of pressures on Mark to do whatever it took to make a sale. And he just felt the weight of that. And so it was a great opportunity for Mark to get to buy into a growing company. But on the other hand, Mark worried that the pressure on him was causing him to change more than his presence there as a Christian was causing the workplace to change. And at one point, he was pressured to invest in the company, which was a good thing to have ownership in it. But he was being pressured to put so much money into buying into the company that he didn't really feel like he could afford to tithe anymore. He'd always been a very faithful tither to the church, but he just didn't have enough money to put that much aside in the investment every month and then still have some for the church. And he felt guilty about that. And I've just faced a lot of Christian business people that they struggled with the fact that, you know, I've got a chance to be salt and light in this dark place, but I wonder if this dark place is not having more of an influence on me and my family than I'm having on it. And so I want you to look at a very interesting passage. I really want us to zero in on Genesis 19, the famous story of Sodom and Gomorrah. But first, I think just to go back to chapter 18, because there's an interesting parallel, a contrast between how Abraham lives his life and how Lot lives his life. And you remember back in chapter 13, Abraham and Lot, they realize that their herds they're victims of their success. They've got so many uh, animals growing in their flocks that they can't keep their herds all together anymore. And so Abraham very graciously stands there and looks out over the land. And to the east, towards Sodom and Gomorrah, is beautiful, lush pasture land. It's lots of vegetation for the herds. And to the west is a desolate desert. And of course, Abraham, as the senior partner, has the right to pick which land that he takes. But he offers Lot the choice. And Lot, to me, is one of the least likable people in the Bible. He just doesn't have any character. He's just a shallow person that never grows. It's an interesting study sometime if you compare Lot and Abraham. In chapter 12, Abraham doesn't have much of a character either, but throughout the ongoing chapters, Abraham keeps growing. Lot never does. It's like Lot never grows the whole time you see him in the Bible. He's a selfish, shallow, somewhat fearful person when you first see him. And he's someone that kind of needs care and oversight his whole life. He just has a hard time making wise choices on his own. And at the last time you see him, he's still a pitiful character, just a person who never grows. You know, in the Bible, God doesn't necessarily condemn you for being immature if if you're willing to keep growing. But you are condemned if you are immature when you start out and you're still immature when 30 years later. You should have grown. And so when you get to chapter 18, that chapter looks a lot at Abraham. And it says, the Lord appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the heat of the day. He looked up and he saw three men standing near him. And when he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them, bowed down to the ground, and said, My Lord, if I have found favor with you, please do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought, that you may wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. I will bring a bit of bread, so that you may strengthen yourselves. Uh, this is why you have passed your servant's way. Later you can continue on. Yes, they replied, do as you have said. So Abram hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, Quick, knead 3 measures of fine flour and make bread. Abraham ran to the herd and got a tender choice calf. He gave it to a young man who hurried to prepare it. Then Abraham took curds and milk, as well as the calf that he had prepared, and set them before the men. He served them as they ate under the tree. So Abram is by this time he is well into at least his late, probably his late 70s. He's living in a desert, and it's at the heat of the day. It's the time when you would least expect anything important to happen. Certainly, you would not be expecting an encounter with God at this time. It's a siesta time. It's a time when it's so hot in that desert, you just want to rest in the shade. But he looks up, and there is basically God and 2 angels standing there in human form. And Abram apparently recognizes who they are right away, and he says, "Don't go on past." And I love that. I love that phrase because he realizes that God is going about somewhere. God's on mission. He's clearly carrying out his work, and Abram realizes, well, I want God, before you move on, would you have fellowship with me first? Which I think is an interesting way to look at God, because anytime God encounters your life, it's not like you're the only show in town. It's not like all he cares about is just what's going on in your life. God's always doing countless things in people's lives around the world. He's constantly carrying out his work. But Abram says, before you go on, let me spend time with you. And part of what it means to, and then you see him running and hurrying. He realizes what a privilege this is to have time with God. And so he he gets a young calf, which would have been very special. He has his wife make bread, and he gets their feet washed, and he's trying to minister to them. And so he has time to fellowship with them. And because he's fellowshipping with these divine messengers or people, heavenly visitors, um, then God basically says, "Hey, by the way, when I come back next year, your wife Sarah's going to have a baby." Now, Abram wouldn't. I mean, Abram has been told this before, that a baby's coming, but now he learns baby's coming soon, and within the next year, within really probably the next 9 months. And he wouldn't have known that had he not been spending time with God. And what I found is a lot of times we think that spending time with God is our opportunity to tell God what's on our heart, what we're concerned about. But largely, spending time with God is learning what's on his heart. And he knows, of course, things that we don't know. And so when we're fellowshipping with God, part of our time needs to just be spent listening and hearing what God is involved in, what he's going to do. And in this case, of course, famously, Sarah is listening in. They live in tents, so the walls aren't very thick. And Sarah hears what God says, and she laughs. And God, of course, is aware she's laughing and says, well, why did she laugh? And I thought to myself, uh, has God done anything in your life that if you were told that 10 years ago that that was going to happen, you would have laughed too? You would have said, that's never going to happen in my life. That's never going to happen in my family. That's never going to happen in my church. God has a way of doing things that seem almost laughable to us, but with God, all things are possible. And then when they're getting ready to leave, uh, an interesting statement there in verse 17, God says, "Should I hide what I'm about to do from Abraham?" And again, the Bible later is going to, in three different places, it's going to describe Abraham as being a friend of God. And part of what it means to be a friend of God is that God shares his heart with you. And certainly in a time as confusing and troubled as our day is here in America and around the world, uh, it's an interesting time to know what's on the heart of God. And God certainly has his thoughts about the situation in the world. God certainly knows what he intends to do about what's going on in the world today. And wouldn't it be awesome if God looked upon you as a friend that he could trust to share some of what he's doing? And so God does share with Abraham and says that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is so grievous that it's calling out to me. We can hear the sound of their sin all the way up to heaven. And of course, Sodom and Gomorrah become famous as being wicked, some of the wickedest places ever. There's not many cities that God just says enough and utterly destroys, but he's going to do that to Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's interesting in chapter 19, a lot of the ways that Sodom and Gomorrah, the way the story is told, it sounds very similar to the time of Noah. It's even going to say that it rained down fire and brimstone. That the sin got so bad, God just said enough is enough. And a lot of people have said, could the sin of America get so bad that God just says enough is enough? And certainly it could. Certainly God is very gracious and God is long suffering, but the clear testimony of the Bible is that at a certain point you can get so bad that God just says, you've crossed a line with me, and now there's nothing left for you but judgment. And so, of course, then Abraham begins to famously intercede for the people facing judgment. And he starts off and says, well, God, if I know that they're wicked, but if we could find 50 righteous people, would you spare them? And of course, God says yes. And Abraham keeps going down by 10 until he gets all the way down to 10 people. And he says, God, if you even found 10 people left, would you spare the city? And God says yes. Now, as we'll see as we enter into chapter 19, which is really where I want to focus. And by the way, that you see the influence Abraham has as a friend of God. God comes to him. At this point, Abraham's must be 99 years old because a year later, he's going to be a father at age 100. And so he's a 99-year-old man living in, having a siesta in the middle of the hottest part of the day in the desert. And all of a sudden, he has an invitation or a visitation from God. And God says, by the way, I'm going to give you the son you've always dreamed of having. And I'm also going to judge the most wicked cities on earth. And so over a lunchtime of fellowship with God, Abram has learned all this amazing insight. And he's actually interceded on behalf of Sodom and gotten God down from 50 righteous people to 10. That's all it will take for him to defer. And of course, we know that later God had a similar design to destroy Nineveh. And he sent Jonah to let them know. And when they repented, God relented and said, all right, I didn't. So it's clear that if God does find some righteous people, he's inclined to forgive. And so Abraham has had this incredible opportunity to intercede for the behalf of others. And could I tell you, there's few privileges greater than the opportunity to intercede on behalf of people that may not even know they're being prayed for. They may not even know they need to be prayed for. And yet for you to intercede. And when you see problems in Israel or Ukraine or Washington, D.C., or wherever it is, um, you have the opportunity each time to intercede just like Abraham did. So that's all. And the other thing that's kind of sad about that is that because of Abraham's intercession, God has said, all I need are 10 righteous people in that city, and I won't destroy it. And now the shift goes to Lot. And Lot, we're going to find, lives in Sodom. He's actually a leader in Sodom at this time. And he's married. He's got a wife. He's got 2 daughters. So, and then we find out the 2 daughters are engaged to be married. So that's 6 people in Lot's family circle, which means that all he has to do is be a witness, an influence on 4 sodomites besides his family, and he could spare the whole city. And we don't, I guess he would have lived in Sodom 20 or so years, perhaps. We don't know for sure when he officially moved in, um, but probably at least 20 years. He's had 20 years to exert a godly influence on that city. And ultimately, you realize he hasn't been able to influence even his own wife to trust and fear God's word. He's not convinced his own future sons-in-law to trust his God. You see Abraham in a desert exerting all kinds of influence with God and others. And you see Lot unable even to have a godly influence on his own family. So you get to chapter 19, and it says, the 2 angels entered Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in Sodom's gateway. Now, you remember that in chapter 13 of Genesis, when Lot and Abraham split up, it says that Lot moved in the direction of Sodom. He moved towards Sodom. It doesn't say he was in Sodom. He was just going to get close to Sodom. And have you ever known Christians that spent a good deal of their time trying to figure out how close to the world they could get without crossing the line? You know, the Bible doesn't say that you can't do this, and the Bible doesn't say you can't do that, and so they just, I just have even just some longtime friends and associates that every time it seems you're talking to them, they're trying to justify why they're living so close to Sodom. And I've thought, here's a contrast. Lot wants to get as close to Sodom as he can get, and still maintain his own righteousness. Abram is always trying to get as close to God as he can get. You can tell the difference between someone who's driven by getting close to the world and someone who wants to be close to God. And so in chapter 13, Sodom is just moving toward, or Lot is moving toward Sodom. And then in chapter 14, when Sodom is captured by some invading armies, we find that Lot is living in Sodom at that time. So at first he might have said, well, I'm a righteous person. I'm not going to live in a depraved city like that, but I'll live nearby because they've got good shopping there, and maybe we can go in, catch a movie sometime or whatever, but we won't live there. And then the very next chapter, they live there. And then when you get to chapter 19, it says he's sitting in Sodom's gateway. And of course, when you sat at a city's gateway, it typically meant you were an elder of the city. That's where the elders sat, because that's where the courts were held. So if you had a civil lawsuit of some kind, you were seeking justice, you could take your case to the city gates, and the elders would sit there, and you could get one of the elders to rule over your case. And so Lot now has gone from being someone who lived near Sodom to someone who lived in Sodom to someone now who is a leader in Sodom. At least and the interesting thing with Lot is he's in a position of leadership. what we're going to find is he's not really leading. And of course, the old adage, um, the way you know if you're a leader or not is anybody following you? And so Lot is sitting in a seat of leadership, but what we're going to find is people don't take him seriously. He's not even leading his own family well, but he's got the trappings of being a leader. He's sitting in the city gate. And so while he sits there in the evening, it says that the two angels arrive. And so it says Lot bowed his face to the ground and said, "My lords, turn aside to your servant's house, wash your feet, and spend the night. Then you can get up early and go on your way." So Lot is speaking to these angels in similar ways to the way Abraham did. You don't have necessarily the sense that Lot right away recognizes these are divine messengers, because he speaks respectfully. He says, "My lords," and of course, God is the person. The God figure is not here, just the angels. But that the term "my lords" could also just be a very polite, respectful way of addressing meeting people. And you realize it's important to realize in this story that in the Middle East, it was considered highly important that you showed hospitality. Of course, there's no hotels, restaurants. So if you're traveling, you're really very dependent upon people's hospitality. The society couldn't function without a code of showing hospitality to strangers. And so Lot is an elder. He's trying to set the example. He's trying to do the responsible thing. And he says, "Come and come to my house, spend the night at my house." And I've seen some people that kind of compare the way Abraham fed these people and the way Lot did. It says Lot put a feast together, but it's interesting. Abraham has Sarah knead some fine flour, make some bread, and then it says Lot has unleavened bread. And of course, unleavened bread is bread made in a hurry. That's what the Israelites had before leaving Egypt. It's bread without yeast. In other words, you don't wait for the yeast to rise the bread so it's nice and fluffy. It's unleavened bread is tougher, harder, quicker. It's kind of like having guests and whipping up some grilled cheese sandwiches for them. I mean, you feed them, but it's nothing all that special, right? Um, and so you even get a sense Lot's kind of emotions of being a good host. Whereas Abraham went out and personally got a young calf, and it gave all the instructions to make sure everything was done well. You sort of, in a sense, you see Lot going through the motions of being a host, whereas with Abraham, you get the sense he did it really from his heart. So, but the angels said, "No, we'll just spend the night in the square." But he urged them in verse 3 so strongly that they went and stayed at his house. And then verse 4 says, "Before they went to bed, the men of the city of Sodom, both young and old, the whole population, surrounded the house. They called out to Lot and said, 'Where are the men who came to you tonight? Send them out to us so we can have sex with them.'" Now, of course, this is often viewed as the evidence of just how depraved this city had become. And of course, there's homosexual sex is highlighted here, and but it's more than that. It's homosexual rape. It is not just even sexual relations. It's forcible rape of of these two angels, or attempted to do that. But it's worse than that because they're visitors. So this is not only are you just raping someone, but you're raping visitors who are the code says you have to show hospitality to, you have to be kind to. And so they're violating the most fundamental of Middle Eastern rules of etiquette. In not only are they not gracious hosts, but they're actually assaulting, harming, shaming people that they should be treating with respect and honor. And but it's worse even than that, because it's not just the men doing it, but it's the men and their sons doing that. It's intergenerational. If you can imagine a dad raping an out-of-town guest, and then say, "Okay, son, it's your turn." So it's the depravity has moved from generation to generation, and it's not even, and it's even worse than that because it says it's all the men, it's all the whole town comes out. So it's not even like some of the, these are just some of the riffraff of the town, some of the despicable people living on the other side of the tracks. Uh, this is everybody. The whole, it's reflective of the attitude of the entire city. All the men, all the leadership of this city are all in agreement about acting in a very, very depraved way. And so this is, of course, the word sodomy comes from here. Just the unnatural, immoral sex. And this city is just pervaded by it. And so they're demanding that that they get their hands on these two visitors to have their way with them. And Lot, of course, is mortified. He's brought them under his roof. I think part of it's hard to know what Lot thinks of these men. Does he realize they're angels? If he had much faith in angels, he probably could have just said, "Okay, angels, do your stuff." But he's trying to protect them, and but then he says something that's one of the most bizarre things, hard to understand things you're going to read in the Bible. He says in verse 7, "Don't do this evil, my brothers. Look, I've got two daughters who haven't been intimate with a man. I'll bring them out to you, and you can do whatever you want to them. However, don't do anything to these men because they've come under the protection of my roof." I can't, any of us who are fathers and any of us who have daughters can't even imagine Lot in his wildest imaginations thinking this was a good idea. Uh, People have wrestled with this. Why on earth would he ever offer his two innocent girls to this rabble in order to protect two total strangers he's never met before that evening? But one or two comments I'd have about that. One is it shows you in part just how strong it was, the call to hospitality. To be inhospitable was considered an awful, awful sin to commit. So Lot is literally feeling it would be better to sacrifice his own daughters than to sacrifice his hospitality. But you also realize Lot may be more I'm not sure what drives this. Uh, Clearly his family is not a priority to him because he's willing to sacrifice them in order to please someone else. And you know, I've worked with a lot of folks in the business world, and at times because of uh, the job they had, the responsibilities, the obligations they had, maybe it's to travel a lot, maybe it's to be away a lot in the evenings, but they essentially sacrifice their family in order to please someone else, to meet someone else's expectations. And what I found that Lot demonstrates is that if you get too close to the world, you can find yourself at one point where you're in a no-win situation. That no matter what Lot does, it's going to be catastrophic. He's either going to have two guests be gang raped on his front step, or he's going to have his two daughters be raped by this rabble. But no matter where he turns now, suddenly he's going to lose. And this really poses a huge issue for a lot of people that work, especially in secular environments, is um, how close can I get? How involved can I get in a company, in secular activities, before I change more than I change the organization? I've had many a person. I've talked to a number of people who said that they were entering politics because they wanted to change America, or they wanted to change the country that they were in, and but then over time, the politics changed them more than they changed politics. They went in thinking that they would have an influence, but they ended up being influenced far more. And you sort of get the sense with Lot that he may have thought that he could be a positive influence on Sodom, but Sodom is going to ultimately exert a far greater influence on him and his family. And, I've had many people say, well, do you think I should take a job working at this company that produces this kind of product? Or should I, align myself with a place where the culture is pretty ungodly, where I'm maybe one of the only Christians there? And I would say, I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule about that. God does tell us not to be unequally yoked with darkness when we're light. But at the same time, the Sermon on the Mount also tells us to be salt and light. And if you're going to be salt and light, you need to be in a dark place where your light makes a difference. But the question is, how much darkness can you handle? And whenever you get around darkness, you become darker, then you're probably better off to be like Abraham and have your family out in the wilderness away from Sodom. Abraham is going to grow up and raise his Isaac, not in the streets of Sodom, but in the wilderness where all they have is God. And I'm not saying that, God's ways are always to isolate yourself from the world. But Abraham will interact with people in the world along the way too. He often messes up when he does that. He went down to Egypt and he totally sold his wife out for that while he was there. And later he's going to lie about his wife to Abimelech in the Philistine area. But he will interact with the world, and a lot of times the world takes it to him. But Lot is just full-fledged, moved right into the world. And he's not had the influence that he thought he would have. And so whenever I've just had many, many people ask for advice over the years about how close to get to darkness. And oftentimes they mean well, but I would say, well, if you're going to work at that company, I was in South Africa a month or so ago, and a man told me he was feeling led of God to enter politics to try to make a difference. I said, well, good for you. But he said, what advice do you have for me? I said, surround yourself with godly people that will pray for you and hold you accountable, because you may be entering politics thinking you're going to change the nation. But I said, I've seen too many politicians with the best of intentions that they ended up changed for the worse. And so Lot, for whatever reason, he now finds himself, he's gotten so entangled in this corrupt, evil society that all of a sudden he's in a place where whatever he decides, it's going to be wrong. It's going to be bad. And his family's going to suffer. And so at this point, the men are just insistent. They don't want his daughters. They want the male visitors. And at that point, the angels have had enough. And it says the angel struck all those men blind. And to show you the depravity of that, if I was kind of in a mob mentality, following along a crowd of ruffians, all intoxicated with our passions, I would hope that if I was suddenly struck blind, that would douse my passion. That all of a sudden, if I couldn't see what I was doing, that I would, and it's at nighttime as well, so you're completely dark. I'd be probably more concerned about just getting home and seeing a doctor, getting eye drops or something. But it says these men wearied themselves trying to find the door. Even when they can't see anymore, they're feeling their way along, still wanting to follow through to fulfill their passions. It just tells you something of the depravity, that even after God has struck them blind, they're not going to give up. They're determined to commit this sin. And so then what you notice is that it's really some very, very pitiful verses here. Verse 12, the angel said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, a son-in-law, your sons and daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people is so great before the Lord. And so again, now is accountability. If Lot, who sees himself, oh, by the way, it's interesting, Lot is sitting in a seat of leadership. He sees himself as a person of influence. And he says in verse 7, he says, "Don't do this evil, my brothers." Now he's calling the Sodomites his brothers. He's trying to identify with them and say, "I'm one of you." But then notice what they said. They said, "Get out of the way," they said, adding, "This one came here as an alien, but he's acting like a judge." Uh, Notice they don't say, "This is our brother." Lot is trying to identify with them and say, I'm one of you, I'm a brother." They see him as an alien. And it's really kind of sad because Lot thinks he's fit in. Lot thinks he's now a respected member of society, and he's learning here that they see him as an alien, an outsider. He may now have gotten into a leadership role, but to them he's always going to be an outsider. And then they said, and now he's trying to be a judge. And some of you, I'm sure, have had this experience. I remember when I was working with a bunch of rough and tough bricklayers when I was in college. They were very profane, very uncouth, um, and they would come in on Monday mornings and they would want to wax eloquent about all the debauchery they'd been a part of over the weekend, bragging about it and laughing about it. And I never condemned them. I never said you shouldn't be doing that. But they knew I was a Christian. I was going to plan to go to seminary and become a pastor. And I didn't have to say anything. And they would inevitably turn to me. And I'd built a good enough relationship with them where I got along with them all right. But they still felt the need to justify themselves to me, or to say, "Richard, we know you wouldn't agree with this," or, "Richard, I don't know what you think about this." And isn't it interesting that you don't even have to necessarily say anything, and yet a secular society can see you as being judgmental? And of course, that's the great issue in society today is uh, society doesn't want you just to tolerate what their debauchery. They insist that you agree with their debauchery, that you say that what they're doing is perfectly fine. Otherwise, they're going to see you as being judgmental. And so Lot has been trying to urge them not to commit this sin, and these sodomites are simply going to say, "Well, you're just trying to judge us. You're just being judgmental." Uh, and and that's why it's so hard at times to take a stand of righteousness, because if you do, you're going to be judged as being judgmental. And so now this Lot, who's as a leader, a person of influence, the angels say, "Okay, well, here's your wife, here's you, here's your daughters. That's four of you. Okay, you've been here around 25 years. Who else have you influenced? Who else respects you enough to heed your counsel?" And so he goes to his sons-in-law, and he says, "Get up," he said, "get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. And to me, that's one of the most pathetic parts of this whole story, because uh, surely he knows these sons-in-law, future sons-in-law. He must like them. You suppose he likes them. He's willing to let his daughters marry them. But when he goes and he realizes these men are as good as dead if they don't get out of the city right now, and they don't take him seriously. And I have two daughters-in-law and I have one son-in-law. And I've imagined, what would that be like if maybe I just saw something in the way they were acting that I knew was going to lead to trouble for them, or maybe it was going to hurt their marriage, or it's going to hurt their children. If I saw something in one of my in-laws or one of my kids that I just knew was going to be hurtful to them, if I went to them and just sat down and said, "Listen, I got to tell you what I've noticed and what I'm really concerned about," would they take me seriously? Or would they just blow me off? Would they think I was just, "You must be joking. You can't be serious"? Wouldn't that be terrible if you saw something in a friend, family member that you knew was going to lead to heartache and pain? But when we tried to warn them, you tried to share with them, they didn't take you seriously. Um, and the fact is, Lot had lived his life in such a way that he wasn't taken seriously. And I've known people that we're pretty fast and loose, careless, carefree about the things of God. Didn't live consistently, didn't live with integrity. But then all of a sudden they did see something that was a concern, and all of a sudden they want everybody to take them seriously. But they haven't been acting in a serious way for some time. And then all of a sudden when they need to be taken seriously, no one does. And so he fails to get his own sons-in-law to save their lives. And it says at daybreak, so this has gone on all through the night. It says the angels urged Lot on, get up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. Uh, but then incredibly, verse 16 says, but he hesitated. Because of the Lord's compassion for him, the men grabbed his hand, his wife's hand, in the hands of his two daughters. They brought him out and left him outside the city. So incredibly, Lot is just one of these people that just can't seem to make wise decisions. The angels are urging him, saying the destruction's about to strike. You don't have a moment left to waste. Get out. And he's still hesitating. I don't know if he's looking at his property and thinking, but I built this house. I don't want it. I hate to lose it. I've got a lot of possessions. I'm trying to figure out how to take them all with me. We don't know why he hesitated, but Lot had, or Sodom had such a grip on him that now he thought he was going to have an influence. Now he can't even bring himself to leave it. And so it says the angels just grab him and grab his daughters and wife and pretty well forcibly drag them out of the city. Can you imagine? They're saving them despite themselves. And then the angel said, run for your lives. Don't look back and don't stop anywhere on the plain. Run to the mountains or you will be swept away. That's pretty clear to me. Run for your life or you're going to be killed. Run to the mountains. But Lot said to them, and you just see this over and over again. The angels keep telling him a word from God. They keep telling him what's best. But he's always looking for the deal. He's always looking for the shortcut. Well, is there an easier way to do this? So he says, no, my lords, please, your servant has indeed found favor with you, and you have shown me great kindness by saving my life. But I can't run to the mountains. The disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Look, this town is close enough for me to flee to. It is a small place. Please let me run to it. It's only a small place, isn't it? So that I can survive. It's just like trying to help this guy. It's like, Lot, you're killing me here. I'm trying to help you. Why won't you just heed a word from God and do what he asks you to do? And so Lot says, well, the mountains are too far away. It would be too great of an effort. Again, when it comes to saving the lives of your family, how great of an effort is too great? If God said to me, if you want to save your kids and your wife, go here, folks, I'd start going there. It might be really awkward. It might be painful. But I would want to do anything I could to spare my family. But well, what about that? Can I just go to that village instead? And so in their grace, they agree to that as well. And what's interesting is when you get down to verse 29, it says, so it was when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham and brought Lot out of the middle of the upheaval. And so what you realize is God's not even really doing this for Lot's sake. He's doing it for Abraham's sake. Lot has so little credibility that his own family doesn't take him seriously. But the reason that God spares Lot is because Abraham prayed. Because Abraham has such influence with God, God spares Lot. That's an entirely different thing. Can you imagine if God, if it, perhaps one day it'll become clear. Maybe God might say to some of us, the reason I blessed you is not really because of you. You didn't really do all that much that deserved it, but your father, your brother, your friend prayed for you, and your friend was such a godly person that I chose to spare you, to bless you because of him. I've often thought about that with my parents. I know full well that a lot of why God blesses me is not because of me, it's because of my parents. And that's kind of a humbling thing, isn't it? Where God basically spares Lot. I mean, just look at the way Lot behaves. he's not doing anything that really is worthy of God's favor. And at the end of the chapter, you find out why was he so long suffering with Lot? Well, because of Abraham, not because of Lot. And I tell you, wouldn't that be amazing to be that kind of friend for other people, where your walk with God was so was so close and so powerful that God blessed others. Other people were blessed because you walk with God so closely. And so they are spirit. And then the last thing, maybe just to point out, and of course, there's a bit more to that story, but Lot's wife, she's heard the angels say, "Don't look back." But more than likely, Lot's wife probably was a sodomite. We don't hear of Lot having a wife before he moved to Sodom. So more than likely, he got his wife there. And so if she's from there, she's left two sons-in-law there. She probably left parents and brothers and sisters there. When she hears the destruction falling on the city, she can't help herself. She turns around and looks. And again, it's like Lot, you haven't even been a godly influence on your own wife. She clearly knew what God said, and she didn't take God's word seriously. How have you lived with your wife this long, and your wife still doesn't take your God seriously? Your sons-in-law don't take your God seriously. Uh, Lot, if you're going to live in a city like Sodom, you better be able to be a person of spiritual influence, and you haven't been. Instead, Sodom has been an influence on you. And so, when people ask me, well, do you think I should work here, be involved in this kind of place with this kind of people? I would say, well, it depends on whether you're an Abraham or a Lot, uh, because you need to go before God to ask God, do I have the stamina, the spiritual backbone, to be a person of influence in a very ungodly place? If I don't, then I probably need to be careful, and I probably need to head out to a wilderness, someplace where I've got some freedom to let my family grow up not being oppressed by a Sodom. And so lots more I could say about that. But maybe let me just stop there in case there's a question or a comment. But obviously, this is a chapter filled with issues and some pretty uncommon things. There's some stuff happens in this chapter that you don't typically see most places in the Bible, but very stark, and I think some very powerful lessons, especially for those of us trying to live a righteous life, to raise righteous kids and grandkids in an increasingly unrighteous, ungodly society in which we live today. So any comments or observations there, just the last few minutes we have?
Yeah, Richard, what a dichotomy between Lot and Mordecai.
Yeah. It is interesting, isn't it, the way that that's laid out. And after this chapter, you don't really see Lot anymore. He's done. But Abraham continues on, and his descendants continue on. And Lot was not chosen like Abraham was, but Lot had every opportunity, like Abraham, to raise up righteous children and to be a godly influence as well. I mean, can you imagine your uncle is Abraham, a friend of God? What could you have learned from him, from his example, had you chosen to? Instead, even though he's got one of the greatest saints in all of history as his close relative, Lot never seems to learn a thing from that.
Richard, could there be another Sodom today in this world we're in?
Oh, I think certainly. I think anytime you see something in the Bible, what you're learning is the ways of God. And now I don't know, like Sodom apparently was pretty depraved for some time. So I don't know the time frame. I don't know when God says enough is enough, but clearly God's patience runs out at a certain point. And I don't know when, I don't know where that is. I don't know when that line gets crossed, but clearly God is long suffering, but even his patience has a limit.
I think the lesson is that we, mostly older guys, have this opportunity to exert influence in our families, but to do it with love.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my big takeaways with Lot is the disaster. I mean, of course, by the end of this chapter, his two daughters are going to sleep with him. They're going to use him sexually. He was going to use them sexually to protect his. If you can imagine being those girls and hearing this crazy mob outside your front door and your dad hollering out, "I'll give you my two daughters. You can do whatever you want to them. Just don't harm my guests." Um, I don't know what that did in the hearts of those daughters, but I'll tell you what, they knew right then their dad did not have their best interest at heart.
It's
And
interesting.
because of things he said in a moment of fear, uh, they're not going to feel in any qualms about making use of him because they know that he would have done this, he would have made use of them. And I've just thought, in a moment of fear, a moment of passion, our kids, our grandkids are watching everything we do. And might take them to church for years, but then in one moment of fear, they see you acting in a way that just confirms to them what you're really like. And so, yeah, it's very sad to me to see the way Lot can't even. He wants to sit at the city gate and be an influence on the city of Sodom. He's not even really a positive influence on his own kids.
Now, Richard, it's
Richard,
interesting when you look at,
What,
oh, go ahead. Somebody else had a question.
yeah, Richard, Abraham pleads with God to save, all the way down to 10 righteous men. Will he save the city? Is he inferring that Lot is righteous?
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't necessarily. That's an interesting thing. Like it doesn't necessarily say that Lot wasn't righteous. You don't see Lot engaging in depravity. He's not. He's. I think his own personal standards seem to be righteous. But sometimes your righteousness is basically rule following. It's morals, right? Can you be a good church going guy that maybe doesn't treat your kids very well? Can you be a deacon and an elder at your church, but you disrespect your wife? There's certain parts of Lot that seems like he got some things right. But he just was and I think sometimes you can even have some personal integrity, some personal honesty, but just have and I've known people like that. I think they were pretty good men, but their kids were all disasters. I guess you could say they were righteous in a sense, but they just didn't have any influence on anybody else. And so, yeah, I think that kind of implies that Lot probably is going to be classified in the righteous section. It's just the righteous section that couldn't convince anyone else to be righteous.
Any questions or comments?
I think it's James calls him righteous Lot. That always bothered me when he says that. Just
Yeah. Yeah.
he called him righteous Lot, but again, his God's perspective is different than ours.
Right. And I mean, and also I guess it depends who you compare him to, right? Like compared to all the Sodomites, he appeared pretty righteous, right? They think he's judging them because he's trying to stop them from doing something that's wrong. But then sadly, in the next breath, he's suggesting that they do something else that's wrong. And being righteous doesn't mean you just pick the least offensive sin. It means that you just don't sin, right? And Lot was basically recommending something else, like rape my daughters. But I mean, so yeah, he's trying to, well, don't do that. That would be bad, but do this bad thing instead. And so I think he just finds himself, he knows they're both wrong, but he's gotten so entangled with them now, he doesn't feel as if there's any other choice. But yeah, I think compared to the Sodomites, Lot's pretty righteous. But I think, in God's eyes, though he falls far short still.
Chronically, he's called righteous Lot in Hebrews. It's in Hebrews. Called righteous Lot.
Yeah. So God, the scripture calls him that. So but I think you can still be righteous and then have very little to no influence.
Is it right to say that intercession is bargaining with God?
I wouldn't say bargaining, because bargaining, I mean, I think intercession means you're appealing to what God kind of wants to do anyway. You know, intercession is pleading like, because even Abraham, when he prays, he says, you know, God, you're basically, he says you're a righteous God. Would a righteous God allow righteous people to be consumed with the unrighteous? And so I think intercession is appealing to the character and the ways of God, and saying, God, I'm not asking you to do something that's not really in your nature to do. I'm appealing to your nature and to your inclination. And so I'm calling on you and asking you to do what is in your nature to do, which is to forgive. But it's also recognizing it's also in God's nature to be righteous and holy. And so, yeah, I don't know if it's, and there are a few places like with Moses, when he prays, God, don't destroy the Israelites because they've sinned. You know, take my life instead of theirs. There's a couple of really awesome moments of intercession where Abraham or Moses or others, Daniel, where they're righteous themselves, but they're pleading on behalf of those who aren't as righteous. And I think sometimes there are sinners who don't even know they're sinners. They don't even know they're facing judgment. And so it needs to be a righteous person who does understand what's at stake to talk to God on behalf of others who don't necessarily know. And so I think that's maybe more what intercession is we understand God has shown us what's on his heart. And so now that we know what's on God's heart, we know how to pray. And the unrighteous don't know what's on God's heart. They don't know how close judgment is. So they're oblivious to the fact of how much they need prayer.
Thank you.
There's a lot there, isn't there?
There
So, yeah, you might want to read through that again, but it is interesting to put those two chapters together and see what it's like when you have a close walk with God and how God shares his heart with you, lets you be involved in what he's doing. And then someone that's not walking closely with God in the sense of knowing God's heart and not and being a person that God's not using to make a difference in anyone's life. Prayerfully, this month, God will just use you in some way to exert a positive influence on the
Froze on us, Richard. All right, well, maybe it's because the hour is up. Richard, if you can hear us, thank you. And we'll be praying for your sister. And remember, they need this.
thanks.
So, oh, there you go, Richard. You froze up on us. We lost the last few seconds, but
Okay, just saying, I look forward to seeing you all next month. Appreciate your prayers for my sister, and I pray God uses each of you to exert a powerful influence for good on the people around you.
thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. God bless.